She was a major act. Cilla Black was a major act. You didn't turn off, did you?
Cilla is definitely a memory. She's not a modern reality at all.
If Cilla Black had faded into obscurity in 1967, she would now be recognised as one of the most important female singers that this country's ever produced.
No, 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 no.
There's just something about that quality of voice that is so unique and so passionate.
No, 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 no.
The singing was merely a way to get her personality over to the public. Once it was established that it was the personality they were buying and not the singing, it's been plain sailing for her.
No, 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 I'm not a juvenile delinquent.
So many bands have admitted they have been incredibly influenced by the artists of the 60s. It's generally been about the male artists. Most of the women have just been completely forgotten, and they were there too.
Wow, rock and roll. Whenever I'm with you, somebody... We all love music. Every man and his dog in Liverpool loved music. We were quite violent as well in Liverpool, but we had the music.
I think that scene for women changed quite drastically in the early 60s because there were so many influences at that time colliding on the pop scene.
Clyde McFadden.
A lot of that was the music that was coming over from America.
Del and the Del Vikings.
The black R&B and the soul music and the impact of the girl groups.
Screaming Jay Hawkins.
British artists just had to update themselves and update themselves really quickly.
I was hooked on all this black music that came from America. Burning in my heart, I can't keep from crying, it's tearing me apart. But we'd go down to a type of shop like Nems in Whitechapel in Liverpool and ask for all these artists and go into those booths.
The only way they could hear of current trends was to come in and block up all our listening booths and listen to them. So we were sometimes patient and let them do that.
I used to stand in the booth and, you know, ask for these songs over and over again to be played so I could learn them to sing in the club that night.
There were quite a few different style of places in Liverpool in the 60s. There were kind of ballrooms. There was a place called the Iron Door, which was a bit of a beatnik club. And there was the Cavern.
Hi there, all you cave dwellers. This is Bob Wooler saying welcome to the Best of Cellars.
Which was an amazing place, but very, very tiny really, very sweaty and very dark and, you know, great atmosphere down there.
I find it very interesting that the Beatles were so interested in her and they were writing songs particularly for her.
There probably is an element of luck in the way she was picked up.
Undoubtedly, her association with the Beatles is what got her started.
But that's not to do her down. I think she also was very savvy.
She was singing the kind of songs that the Beatles liked, which was rhythm and blues stuff. And those type of songs had this honesty in it, I suppose, and the kind of exuberance that she was best at.
I was working in an office as a clock typist in Stanley Street, and the Cavern was now going. I'm gonna dig
I don't know how this madness started, where wherever band was on stage, we'd call Cilla to get up and give us a song.
Actually, the first time I sang in a club was at the Iron Door, and the Beatles were playing.
They weren't huge at the time. They had quite a little following.
I suppose for terrible, wonderful, a tea dance.
Like, you can go to afternoon sessions and play 1 or 6 or something and it'd be half empty.
They all said, let Cilla sing, let Cilla sing. And it was John. John said, okay, Cyril, come on, come up and have a go. What do you want to sing? And at the time, Sam Cooke had a very big hit with Summertime. And I sang that with them. And then it kind of, the word went round. Until in the end, I was sort of being billed as swinging Priscilla.
Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager. He is the not yet grey eminence behind the surging popularity of the foggy Liverpool accents which today dominate the popular.
Brian came down in his navy blue cashmere overcoat and his Hermes navy blue and white spotted silk scarf to the Cavern. I remember him being there on that first day, on that lunch lifetime session to hear the Beatles. Because he was so gorgeous, and I thought, he's got money, I fancy that man.
John Lennon, who was Cilla's original champion when he was suggesting to Epstein that Cilla should be signed up.
Yeah, I thought he'd be the last person. I thought of anybody, it would be Ringo.
She was just this girl called Cilla who would get up and sing, and then occasionally we'd end up back at her mother's house having coffee.
Because we were great mates, but it was John. And it was John who said, you know, there's a girl singer in Liverpool you ought to hear.
You never know how much I love you, and you never know how much I care.
I was very nervous because this was the big chance of a lifetime. And I blew it. I just blew it. Apart from the fact that, you know, the boys were playing in their key rather than mine, it didn't help a great deal. So... You know, that was, no, there was not even a thank you at the end of it. He was very, very shy. Brian was very, very shy. But I mean, I knew anyway. I knew after I'd come off with the Beatles that I knew I'd blown it.
What, she played with the Beatles, or she, for Brian?
Yeah, I think she did an audition.
Yeah. Well, she'll tell you anything to get on TV, that girl. She's always been pushy.
It wasn't until about sort of 6 months later. I was just gigging about at the Blue Angel, and I didn't know he was in the audience this night. And he came up to me after that, and
all through the summer of 1963, then, Brian was singing the praises of this new girl that he was on the brink of signing named Cilla.
Well, at the time, nobody wanted to know anything about Liverpoolians until Brian Epstein came on the scene. I mean, it was a bit of a handicap to anybody who did come from Liverpool because of the way they spoke.
At a time when attention throughout the country was focused on all things Liverpudlian, you know, she was about as Scouse as it gets.
In his usual modest way, Brian was saying that this girl is going to be as big as Judy Garland.
Obviously the Beatles were his main act, but it wasn't Billy J. Kramer and it wasn't Jerry Marsden that he was pushing next. He really believed that he would be Cilla Black's, you know, manager throughout her life and would build her up into becoming a major international star.
Were you surprised that he went for you rather than... because there were a couple of other women singers at the same time, weren't there? Sort of vying for attention.
no, I wasn't surprised. It sounds terribly big-headed, but no, I wasn't surprised. I mean, you have to be upfront with yourself, don't you?
Well, do I love you, but of
There was no doubt that there were singers around, like Beryl Marsden, for example, up in Liverpool, who, had she actually managed to cultivate the Beatles and had Brian Epstein for a manager, might have been equally as successful as Cilla.
sweet nothing.
Sometimes you could have, with all the best will in the world, you can have the best song in the world. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a huge hit and become incredibly famous.
There's a lot more to it than just having a voice, you know. It's, you know, a whole deal has to come across when you're up there putting it out.
And in fact, I know many talented singers who, you know, I would put above lots of singers who've had many, many hits.
You know, look at me. You know, there's a lot of people sing me off the stage, but I'm still touring.
Cilla's great strength was her self-belief.
You know, that appeals to me. It's something I've never had, that kind of, like, you know, dogged self-assuredness.
I can remember the very first time I ever did an interview with her, and she was saying, I'm going to be a star. I am going to be a star.
I mean, even on my school report, they said suitable for office work. And I was so upset. I mean, all the kids in my class thought this was wonderful because they were going to go off into the factories. And there was I upset that they actually said I was suitable for office work. I mean, I wanted suitable to be a star.
And what of the future?
I hope to become a national star. I'm not really a Cilla fan, so I can't pretend. It's not my sort of music, you know. But John Lennon did write me a song that she actually recorded called Love of the Loved.
No, I was thrilled that it was a Beatles song.
And I didn't get to do it. That's a bit sad, isn't it?
I was thrilled that Paul had written this song.
John and Paul, especially John suggested this song for me, but Brian said he'd promised to do.
The very first song we did together was Love of the Love, a brassy kind of number, and she had a brassy voice to go with it.
Each time I look into your eyes, I see that the heaven lies. And as I look, I see the love of the love.
And then I came down here and I thought, yeah, I'm going to do a rock and roll version of Love of the Loved. And we went into studio and there were no rock and roll musicians there. I mean, you know, there was professional musicians that you paid session fees to. Then they started to play and it sounded very clean and clinical, and it made me sound rather clean and clinical.
What do I care?
I like Love of the Loves because it's really trashy.
I didn't see that for Cilla at all.
I don't think she really stays in key on that.
I think she could have done better songs. But, you know, it did the job. 27 or something.
Brian Epstein tended to be paranoid about the personal lives of any of his artists. I mean, the prime example, I suppose, was the way that the wedding of John Lennon to Cynthia was concealed. I think his paranoia actually was based on his own homosexuality, which of course in those days was not something that was just frowned upon, it was something that was illegal. And so he had to keep his private life extremely private. And somehow he felt that the artists in the public eye should keep their private lives well into the background. But a role had to be found for Bobby.
Was it difficult being the hidden boyfriend, always referred to as the road manager?
Well, I was the road manager. I drove her everywhere. No, it didn't worry me.
Bobby Willis was either a very, very shrewd guy or just incredibly lucky in a sense. But for some strange reason, he ended up writing her early B-sides.
He wrote a cracking song, Shy of Love.
You say you love me and you'll always be true to me.
And it was a toss-up whether Shy of Love was going to be the A-side or indeed the B-side to Love of the Loved.
It meant that he was probably earning more money out of it, of her records, than Cilla Black was.
John Lennon actually was an incredible inspiration to Bobby because he would tell him how great his songs were.
I think he was a baker's apprentice or something. You know, he had no experience as a songwriter as far as I knew.
He just sort of only knew them in his head, really, and he'd go and bend over to the violinist or something and say, it goes like this, doodaloo, doodaloo, doodaloo.
In fact, he was offered a recording contract with Dick James Music, and because Bobby's an incredible singer as well.
Well, it was John and Paul, I mean, they were a great songwriter, and that's why I didn't do it anymore, because I thought, well, I'm never going to be as good as them, you know. So I stopped doing it.
This is an invitation across the nation, a chance for folks to meet.
The rock and roll singer in women didn't really exist, and I thought that Cilla was going to be there when I first met her.
Cilla Black was never allowed to develop as an R&B singer.
She would have been finished in 3 weeks if she'd have gone that route, really.
Brian Epstein didn't want her to go in that direction. I think he was very astute, and he saw that she could be an excellent ballad singer as well.
I don't think George knew that until it was Brian's suggestion and Brian's idea that Cilla should be taken that way.
I think Cilla would have been quite happy to do something more raunchy. I preferred her singing the ballads, I must confess.
Anyone who ever dreamed.
There was a music paper that listed the top 100 in America. Now, even though we hadn't heard the songs before, we would look, or I certainly would look, at the songs that had a bullet, going up with a bullet.
Most of the guy bands were writing their own stuff by this point. The girls, in a sense, were very much more isolated.
So I spotted this name, Dionne Warwick, with Anyone Who Had a Heart, going up with a bullet.
They needed a first-class connection for material, and most of that stuff was coming from the States.
Anyone Who Had a Heart started with Brian coming back from New York. He'd heard Dionne Warwick's record and thought it was very good and came back with it.
I said, I've got that record up. I bought that record last week. Oh, I'd love to do it.
and showed it to me. And in my naivety, I didn't realise that he had Cilla up his sleeve. And I thought it was such, cut out for Shirley Bassey.
Brian was so upset. He said, no, I wasn't thinking of Shirley. It's for my Cilla.
I said, well, do you think she can really give it what it needs? He said, I'm absolutely certain. It was terrific to see her emerging with that song as a completely new artist for me.
Dionne Warwick was rather miffed that Cilla had a way of covering her songs before she could release them in Britain.
What am I to do? Every time you go away, I always say, this time.
With a song which is a cover, which is what that was, you can't do too much to change it. But the orchestra was a bigger sound, it was a nicer sound. The performance that Cilla gave was distinctive. There was no way it itself to Dionne's performance.
Dionne, the cow that she is. No, I say that because we have this sort of love-hate relationship, I think. I mean, I love her more than she... I love her as much as she hates me. She reckons that, we copied it. She actually does say today, and it's on record, that if she would have sneezed in the middle of anyone who had a heart, I would have sneezed too. But it's not so.
I think the two records go side by side, England and America. I think they're fine.
I actually prefer Cilla's version of Anyone Who Had a Heart.
No, I would have been about 3 or 4. And I remember it vividly because it was the only record that we owned.
Dionne's version sounds a little bit tame in comparison.
About a year and a half ago, there weren't too many white singers around that could convey the emotion that I felt in many of the songs that I wrote. Lately, this has changed. I think people like Dusty Springfield and Cilla Black have bridged the gap, are singing with more of an influence of the rhythm and blues, and are able to convey an emotional impact that wasn't felt before in, say, a legitimate pop white singer.
Well, as much as a kind of a 3-year-old can understand passion, it was just the most incredible record that I think could touch anybody.
Were you astonished that the follow-up also went to number 1?
No.
Most artists, whether they're jugglers or comedians or whatever, spend half a career's span waiting to play the prestigious London Palladium. Cilla went in her first year as a 21-year-old, went on to play the Royal Variety Show that year as well, and to have 2 number 1 hits. It was a golden year.
The Beatles had 2 number 1s. I think Jerry had his 3rd number 1. Why shouldn't it happen to me? It was a par for the course with me. And anyway, it didn't matter if it didn't because, hey, I was a star. Since I was a baby, that's all I wanted to do. I wanted to be a star.
You're my world, your every breath I take. You're my world, your every...
It was always difficult finding songs for singers who don't write their own.
George Martin is an extremely clever man.
I had quite a bit of experience with this with Shirley Bassey and Matt Monro and people like that.
Without George Martin, the Beatles would never have got off the ground.
So I would scour Tin Pan Alley for material.
In other areas, some of his ideas were really actually quite old-fashioned.
And quite often, quite a good source of our materials for ballads came from Italy.
So my arms reach out to you for love.
You're My World was a big Italian ballad, and it came to England and had an English lyric put to it, and I thought it was ideal for Cilla.
I think her voice is really made to do big ballads. We have a quiet verse and a loud chorus. She has a quiet voice and a loud voice and switches easily between the two.
She's got the dusky maiden voice, a very gorgeous sotto voce sound, and she's also got what I call the Cilla honk.
She managed to get across the melancholy side of her personality without having to be particularly husky or fragile.
people either say with Cilla they either love it or hate what she sings, the way she sings.
With your hand.
What I liked about Cilla was that you couldn't just say, here's another white woman. You know, there's always been this big fascination about a white woman who can sound like a black woman, you know. You know, what's that all about? The fact of the matter is Cilla sounded like Cilla.
Cilla Black's voice is a cross between a dentist's drill and the Whitby foghorn.
It was a wonderful period for her. She was the biggest singer possibly in the world at that stage in terms of sales and success. 2 successive number ones in 1964, that's just like unbelievable looking back when you consider the competition. Those records were a number one for a long time in the most competitive period of pop music possibly ever.
It gives me now, ladies and gentlemen, great pleasure to introduce to you, backed by the one and only Sounds Incorporated, the marvellous darling Miss Cilla Black. How's about that?
The 60s, in terms of pop music, there were still a lot of restrictions if you were a woman in terms of the sort of songs you sang, the way you sang, the way you dressed. But even if you had a brain, it was very difficult to break out of that and convince people that you were more than just a dolly bird.
I actually think Epstein did her a disfavour, in a sense, because I think he took out of her that natural enthusiasm, that exuberance that I'm talking about, which was there in her very first 2 or 3 records, and replaced it with something that was a lot more prissy.
So much of what Brian did, and the difficulty that Brian was facing always, and he managed to do so much when you consider everything he was doing and all the decisions he was making were the first time anyone had made these kind of decisions.
It was a pretty narrow field for women performers. It's a pretty narrow field for women in general. Women's lib hadn't taken place. They were always the inferior part of entertainment. And they always got paid less. It's still a problem. And the world didn't accept them as readily as they did men.
They were expected to behave themselves and to be in a particular kind of nicey category.
I think that it was quite, it was quite an acceptable route at the time, and there wasn't too much pulling them. There wasn't a great deal, in the general environment that was pulling them away from that or making them feel uncomfortable with it.
If you're a yes person, if you just have a manager or a manageress who just basically tells you what you should and what you shouldn't do, and you go along with it, perhaps, I don't know, you maybe would be more successful as such, but would you be happy at that?
I would put my own feelings aside and say, well, they are the experts, and they were, and certainly George Martin was at the time. And who am I to tell all these great people that otherwise?
You couldn't possibly do a show without the wonderful and talented thingy.
The How It's For You came about was because, my God, here she is. She's had 2 number ones. Paul said, I'll have some of that. Now then, you're talking about disappointment then, because I wasn't surprised at the other 2 going to number 1, but I certainly was peeved with that one. I think it got to number 8 or number 6.
No, there's no welcome look in your eyes when I reach for you. And now you've started to criticize the thing.
At the beginning of 1965, she covered the Righteous Brothers' You've Lost That Loving Feeling, which is a very ambitious thing to do.
I think the terms silk purse and sow's ear could be profitably used here.
It was perhaps cheeky of us to re-record it, but it was such a good song, and it was right for Cilla to do it.
This is a duet here. Do you think I can do this? Yes, because you've got that. You've got those 2 voices. You can do that. You've got those 2 voices that can do that range there.
If you would only love me like you used to do.
And that record, she went to number 2 and they went to number 1, so it was as close as that. I mean, it was not a flop cover by any stretch of the imagination.
I love you, don't find every day.
And I wasn't upset by the the Righteous Brothers getting to #1. Because, I mean, the original should always win every time, hands down, I think. And if you can improve on that, or do a different version, an acceptable version, and get the amount of success that I did with it, I thought it was incredible. So I look at the positive side. But at the end of the day, I do prefer the Righteous Brothers.
I think all the female singers did get frustrated with their inability to crack the American market.
I remember when the Beatles first went to America, and they came back and they were full of it, you know. They'd been to meet Elvis, and Ringo came back and he said to me, "You won't believe this. You will not believe this. You're My World is on, you're number 21 on Elvis's personal jukebox."
She tried in America, but not probably as hard as she could have done, because the record companies were so busy with their men anyway, and they couldn't have cared.
She was covering American material anyway, so she was never going to be afforded much airplay over there.
The night we met, the night that I won't forget.
And she'd had Bacharach, and she had some of the best of Phil Spector. And then early in 1965, she covered Randy Newman's I've Been Wrong Before.
I've been wrong before.
Brian's attempt to pitchfork her into America by putting into a cabaret in New York was probably a misguided one, and I think that people didn't think she was ready for it.
I did it in Britain. There is no reason why I shouldn't do it over there.
I couldn't dare.
You know, you've got to have a tremendous campaign and tremendous support to break through the American market.
Baby, I've been wrong before.
It isn't like England, where you get a national radio and you can break the whole country. In America, you've got to break territory by territory. You've got to, you can be a hit in New York and never heard of in Los Angeles.
I love New York. I thought it was fantastic, and the Beatles were there doing Shea Stadium, and we'd done the Ed Sullivan Show.
Recording star Cilla Black.
It's 85 million people live. Did not faze me out. I am with the Beatles. I have been told I am a star. I've had whatever success I've had in Britain. I can do it. I can do this. I can do this.
But I believed when my love came, my dreams would all come true.
But then the Beatles went home. We all had a big party in the Plaza Hotel, and I was there left to do a season in the Persian Room in the Plaza Hotel.
The point about the Plaza in July was that most New Yorkers had left the city and gone on vacation.
It was a little bit farther away to go home for me Sunday lunch to me mum and dad's in Liverpool.
And foolishly, I thought that I could mean much more to you. But I know better now that we're worlds.
And this plush cabaret room was half full at maximum of millionaires who were totally indifferent to whoever might have been on stage singing to them, but particularly this sort of absolutely unknown girl from England.
I was just terribly, terribly lonely. I've totally regretted it because only because, you know, a wee bit of a coward in me wanted to get back home.
She would probably be as big as she was going to be anyway. You know, I'm not going to sit here and say, no, if she'd have stuck in America, she'd have been the one. Who can tell?
That is England's top recording.
She reconciled herself to the British market and has worked very successfully within the British market.
And now I'd like to sing a song that you made very lucky for me, and it's about one of my favourite boyfriends. What's it all about?
One of the greatest performances she's ever did was with another Burt Bacharach song, Alfie. You know, she gave the definitive performance of Alfie.
I didn't want to do Alfie. I didn't not want to do it at all. And I put all obstacles in the way.
I think he'd written this song, obviously, for the film, and I think he thought of Cilla as being a good vehicle for it.
I said, well, if Bert were to come over to Britain and play piano and do the arrangement for it, I might consider doing it.
It may have been that Dion didn't like it or didn't want to do it or wasn't available or whatever, but nevertheless Cilla had the opportunity.
And all my ifs, he said, yes, I will arrange it, yes, I will play on the session, yes, I will conduct it at EMI.
Bert came round to my flat in Marylebone with Cilla and we routined it. We decided how we're going to do it.
I think, right, I'm made, I've got it. Straight in the do it. And we came in the studio, Studio One.
It's tough for anybody to sing live in a recording studio, particularly with an orchestra of 40 men waiting on you.
Bert was at the piano there. I can see him to this day, you know, conducting and bringing me in.
What's it all about, Alfie? Is it just for the moment?
Because he'd stand up from the piano and do all this incredible... He should have been a ballet dancer.
He feels his music, and so, he was directing the orchestra from the piano. He was playing the piano and conveying the ideas to the orchestra too.
And now I'm enjoying it. First take, second take, third take. Now, normally, 3 takes, you know, or 2 takes in my day, you would get it, especially after all that rehearsal.
As you know, the song isn't just a question of straight rhythm all the way through. There are pauses, there are rowels, and it flows.
So the third take went, and it went on and on and on.
And we got to the take where everything gelled.
I think that's it.
Do you really think so?
Nick, are you there? Would you like to run the orchestra through the other title while we hear that back?
And I thought, that's great, come and listen to it. So Bert came in, and Cilla came in and listened to it.
It's sure feeling better out there. My goodness.
But I want to go on all night, though.
So Bert said, it's not quite right.
I actually thought, what have I got to put into this thing to make him really like what I'm doing here?
Go on, what? Tell me.
It just needs touching off the edges now.
Me?
I believe in love.
And it started going downhill because we'd passed her peak. I knew what she was working up to something, and she got it. And once she got it, it was very difficult to sustain that high level. And she started getting nervous because she wasn't sure what Bert was looking for.
And he just pressed from in there, Bert, what exactly are you looking for? And I love this reply. He said, George, I'm looking for that little bit of magic. George came back and said, well, actually, Bert, I thought we had it in take 3. And I thought, silence, just like it is now. Anyway, take 3 is what you got on the record.
78, take 2. Close on Mrs. Doric from that side and a close on Cilla. Through the chickens.
82, 83.
This is a person, an artist, who clearly had a lot of different talents. And it was exploring where you're going to go with them. I mean, the Persian Room was one of them. That was too sophisticated and too foreign. That was a mistake. So you go back to England and you try and do something else.
Whether or not Cilla was ever cut out, would have ever been cut out for a career in the cinema or not, we shall never know.
Work was a four-letter word was another experiment.
A way out comedy, a vehicle for David Warner.
With a prominent director.
At 37, Peter Hall's recognised as one of the world's leading theatre directors. In this sequence, he was rehearsing with Cilla Black and 300 Chicken.
I think she wants to be that side of camera. Yes.
Where's David?
Right where Derek is.
Hey, if somebody like Sir Peter Hall were to come up to you today and say, I would like you to be in a film with me, and you're going to be the only non-Shakespearean person in the whole film, My God, that is a great compliment to me.
And she tried, and she wasn't bad in it, she was pretty good in it, but it just didn't work as a film.
It was a great experience. I was very, very young, and I loved it all. I loved doing the film bit.
All physical phenomena have causal relationship.
But I loved singing, and I loved what I did more.
I remember the film. It wasn't, as I say, it wasn't a knockout. It wasn't Gone with the Wind, was it?
I don't want a house that's a showplace. I just feel that
It was extremely unusual, if not unique, for an artist to cover a Cilla Black song. But of course, Morrissey and the Smiths were unique.
So change your life. There is so much I know that you can do.
Why did you choose that song?
A bit of a tease, really. I wasn't really attempting to produce a great piece of Gothic art.
Unfortunately, that caused problems within the Smiths. Johnny Marr, Morrissey's partner, said I didn't form a group to perform Cilla Black songs. It wasn't exactly the final straw in the Smiths' story, but it was close to being.
Cilla Black, unbeknown to herself, actually broke the Smiths.
I'm asking you to tell me why you leave me as often as you do.
You've got to imagine Brian Epstein thought of me all the time as my Cilla.
In the later days when he wasn't well, I mean, really, the only thing that he cared about really was the Beatles and Cilla.
Am I to be your used to be? Can I be losing you?
There was a period of 6 months or so that I was left out, and I thought, what have I done wrong?
He was in deeper than he could really cope with. He was very ambitious. He imagined himself as the kind of Diaghilev of rock, and he wanted to have a stable, ever-growing of talent where he could sort of be the king.
She felt that he was giving more attention to the Beatles. All his artists thought that, but the truth of the matter was that he was giving less and less attention to the business.
I think he probably forgot that artists don't want to be part of an empire. They want to have someone with them who is with them all the time, who is nurturing them, looking after them, the father figure.
I'm sure that Brian Epstein thought Cilla Black was the daughter he could never have.
She was finding it very difficult, I think, even to contact him, because he was spending, you know, he was living a nocturnal life, and he just wasn't around doing the kind of business that was necessary to do for an act like Cilla.
He was a very good man, but he did have a lot of problems.
He had this serious drug problem, which meant that he just didn't turn up, you know, and it was just not good enough.
She saw all that happen, which was a great pity, actually, because I think she lost a lot of respect for him.
It was very disturbing because they were used to support and attention. The Beatles were all right. The Beatles were in the studio. They could look after themselves to some degree. Cilla and Bobby needed the support.
I felt I was doing it all, and Brian wasn't. And well, why wasn't he? Has he gone off me all of a sudden? And at the end of the day, I didn't find out till actually after he died that, you know, he had a problem. He had a very bad problem, which he didn't share.
This time your story had better be good, or I may leave you like I know I should.
Cilla and Bobby came to the house, I remember it very well, and they went on the roof. There was a flat roof at Chapel Street, and I didn't go up. I let the three of them slog it out, and it was very, very tense, and it was very upsetting. Everyone was upset because they wanted to achieve something, but they didn't know whether it could happen, whether it could be achieved.
You don't deserve all the love I give you.
Well, I wish he would have shared the problem he had with Bobby and I, because it would have explained an awful lot of unanswered questions.
Brian managed to convince them that he would be able to deliver his time and his energy like he used to, and they were very happy, and it was thank God that he did, because he died shortly afterwards.
A lot of agents in our business, established agents,
Bernie Dolphins and people like that. They would have told you that he wasn't the greatest businessman.
How ruthless do you think you've got to be? Not very.
But he was honest. If he gave his word, that was it. You knew where you stood. He wasn't trying to rip anyone off.
It may even be a fault of mine in the business that I'm not ruthless enough.
Brian did not commit suicide. I know it was an accidental overdose. He was actually found with contracts of mine, new contracts for certain types of venues and shows on the bed. I took great comfort in that, because whereas I felt neglected, I took a lot of solace out of that, thinking that he was found in that way, still more or less caring about me.
It was a terrible thing to happen, but she had Bobby, thank the Lord.
I was doing quite a lot before, excuse me, before Brian's death. And it was just a natural progression, really.
He had the sense to realise that Cilla's future lay not in making records, only records, and doing performances, but in branching out into other forms of entertainment.
I know who you are.
Do you?
Yes.
Well, who am I then?
Cilla Black.
Oh. And I'd like to sing a song for you, or somebody, you know, your friend or somebody. Is there anybody in particular you'd like me to sing a song for?
How sweet of you.
I think the British Beat Girls were testing all kinds of boundaries in lots of ways throughout the 60s. And one of them was, how do you grow old gracefully?
At the time, the men were okay. You could get plenty of men. I mean, Val Dunican and, you know, we did quite a lot of shows. And Rolf Harris show and Engelbert Humperdinck, you know, those type of shows. But I wanted to get a smattering of girls.
At this particular point, Sandy and I were going to do...
We were.
Yes, we were. Tell them. Oh, go on.
What
Tell
were we
them.
going to do?
Well, we were going to do something together, a duet, weren't we?
A duet we were going to do together,
But we
weren't
haven't had time. We haven't had time to practice, have we?
No, we haven't really, have we? No.
Billy came up with one great thing. He said to me, when Cilla comes on the television, I want it to be an event.
Is there any sort of person you'd like me to sing a song for?
She had got the enormous ability to speak to the people.
Got no friends?
Well, it wouldn't have been an event if she was on every 5 minutes. So I said, okay, I'll make sure she doesn't do anything else.
And I remember saying, this is the next Gracie Fields.
Ah, you don't want me to sing a song for anybody then?
And it became an event.
The final deal for Cilla's first BBC variety series was actually done the weekend that Brian Epstein died. He was on the point of calling her and telling her that it was all signed and sealed.
We are together. I was in a dilemma because it was the big show after the Billy Cotton Band show. So they sent me all these opening numbers, Billy Cotton Band show opening numbers. A-rat-a-ta-ta, I'm gonna look for you, you know, opening. And the phone goes, and it was Paul.
Step inside love.
And he said to me, I know what you're doing. You sat there with all the records round you on the carpet thinking, what am I going to open with? And he just said everything, that exactly what they had done. He said, well, I don't think you should do that. He said, because you're the type of person that you should invite people. You're going into people's homes. You've got to make them, you will make them feel like you're in their house. So why don't you make them, or invite them, into your house? You know, step inside, look.
For McCartney to write a song to anybody at that stage was a tremendous privilege.
Cilla, with her rather greater affinity to Gracie Fields than Martha Reeves, brought out the worst in McCartney.
And he would only have done it because of his affection for Cilla Black and his belief that she was an important artist.
He hadn't finished the whole song by the time I did the show. In fact, he was quite rude about it. He said, I haven't finished it yet. He said, I'm going into the bathroom to sit on the loo and write the rest.
I was very glad for her that she was so successful in the television world. And to be honest, I was so darn busy with so many people I had to cope with that any sort of easing of my load was a relief.
They loved me on television at the time. And I was doing theatres, and because I was on telly, I filled the theatres. And I thought, well, if I fill the theatres, what is the problem? I can make hit records. But I was also getting older.
Stepping outside after her marriage to her manager Bobby Willis, the former Priscilla Mary White.
After Cilla Black got married and she became increasingly a TV personality, she had a nose job.
I'd not long done the film Work as a Four-Letter Word.
She spent £210 on that nose job.
And it was like the nose profile was like CinemaScope, and I thought, no. Or Bobby said, no, you need a nose job.
I know you're having a party.
I didn't consciously change my image.
I'm going to come back to the studio, and while you're having your party, don't switch off the telly yet.
Television kind of changes your image for you. You go out there in front of 21 million viewers at the time, and they dictate what songs they want you to sing on television and stuff. And to get those ratings, to get those 22 million ratings, they shape your career for you.
Oh, you are a mucky kid, dirty as a dustbin lid.
We are a tiny island here in Britain, and we were expected literally to do everything. You had to do dance numbers, you know, act, comedy sketches on television, do the whole caboodle.
Your father's nose.
The secret of her TV success is that she is that real person. You know, that's what comes across. You know, she has not turned into like this other person.
There's something about her with which a lot of people feel comfortable and at ease. And she's really come into her own since she stopped singing.
Strawberry jam tarts in your hair.
I think 6 years was a long run for the pop star in them days. 6 years was a long time.
She does not put on hers.
It's quite a
Not in my company. I mean, God knows how she treats you, but she's all right with me.
She's terribly talented. She really is. I don't think she realizes herself. You know, I'm not selling a brush that doesn't sweep. You know, she's there, she can do it. You've only seen the tip yet.
Although you have no silver spoon, better days are coming soon. Our Nellie's working at the Loop, and she gets paid on Friday.
You didn't turn off, did you?
Perhaps one day we'll have a splash when Little Woods provide the cash. We'll get a house in Naughty Ash and buy your dad a brewery. Oh, you are